Okay, so as we head into late summer, then 1851, a couple of problems have arisen. Nothing too serious, medium serious. So the first one, then, let's have a look at our campaign in Aden. Now things have become suddenly a little bit complicated. As we've kind of injected forces into this region, namely a marine division, but also we've sort of sent some irregular militia forces, a very small force, one force, just a brigade, for the defence of Sana'a. This has increased the logistical strain in this region, and the result of this has been that Khurshid Pasha's force in Hadramaut has depleted the supplies in its kind of supply caravan, and is now partially unsupplied in this region. As a result, he's sort of pretty much permanently deactivated, and I'm falling him back to Sana'a. Also, we can see that the only supplies that the Marine Division is actually holding is kind of what it's carrying on its back. There is no supply train with this force, so we're falling them back to Hurdada, and this is poor planning on my part and nothing more, really. It was the case really throughout most of this year that I could see that Khurshid Pasha's force was gradually kind of eating into its supplies, beginning to work through its supplies. And it occurred to me that at some point I'd have to fall back towards Sana'a or Hurdada to sort of stock up, probably the port at Hurdada. Now, the way that supply works in the game is it's a commodity like any other. If we go to our assets balance, we can see supplies here, military supplies, and then ammunition. We're importing a small amount of supplies. And what happens is this is converted on the map into stockpiles. Now, the only locations that can hold stockpiles are large cities, basically, or large towns with a factor of 3 or above, or smaller towns, or just locations that contain a depot. So Ankara, for example, is at the moment only a very small city, but if we click on Ankara, we can see that it contains a depot, just a very small depot. Now, if we look at Aden, of course, there are no depots there at all. It's not even, we now militarily control a part of the country, but there are no depots there. In fact, the closest depot to Aden is in Jerusalem. This is a modest-sized depot. I think it's. Let's have a look at what size it is. Okay, so it's a kind of it's a medium-sized sort of depot, and the supplies from Jerusalem have to travel to Aqaba, and then through the Red Sea, and then all the way down here to this kind of port in Hurdada, and then Sana'a. Now that's quite far. Typically speaking, supplies don't really travel more than sort of 3 or 4 provinces, especially if they're kind of if there are no railroads, and these are kind of poorly developed. In this case, these are tracks, and in this case, the supplies have to move all along the Red Sea. So, and the only way that you could really move supplies, maritime supplies, is through trade boxes. So I think the Red Sea maritime trade zone will probably be this box here. We have no merchants here, so. Not optimal. I've not really given a huge amount of thought to logistics, and of course logistics are the ball and chain of warfare, even if it's a kind of very limited sort of proximity colonial conflict. So anyway, to that end, I've taken the measure of beginning building a depot in Sana'a. I'm hoping that that's close enough that will begin to accumulate some military supplies and alleviate the supply situation. Also, in addition to that, because that may not work, once Khurshid Pasha gets back into Sana'a, I'm going to detach his supply train. We're going to send that to Hurdada. We're going to embark that and send that north, and we're going to sit that in Jerusalem for a period of time. We've in order to accumulate supplies, we've detached a supply convoy from Omar Pasha's force. He doesn't need it. He's in Smyrna. He's adjacent to a large city which has lots of supplies and ammunition. So we've detached his supply wagons, and they're heading to Jerusalem. They're about to land in Jerusalem, I think, in a day, and then in 16 days, that that supply force will arrive at Hodeida, and then we're going to move them to link them up with Khurshid Pasha's force, and that should alleviate the supply situation, if only temporarily. If this continues to be a problem, then we're going to have to remove much of the forces that we've actually put into Aden in the last period, in the last year, and probably limit our force to Khurshid Pasha's force. Possibly we might need to look at expanding our harbour in Hodeida as well. But yeah, so it's nothing's catastrophic. We're not losing lots of soldiers or anything like that at this point. We're not having lots of desertions or anything. But it is going to be the case that unless we take sort of proactive measures now, that will start happening. So first problem here that we're trying to deal with. The other is, now the plan this year was, of course, to colonize Libya, to sort of formally turn Libya into a colony. It's currently a protectorate, and to do that we have to maintain sufficient amount of colonial penetration. I think we're probably still sitting at 57%, which is sufficient. Yeah, 57%. Our second competitor is Sardinia. They have 10%, and then Prussia sits at 4%. That's no longer on the cards. The reason it's no longer on the cards is a bit of a situation has developed in Qatar. Now, in Qatar, the British have sent colonial merchants. They've only just sent the colonial merchants. They already had a small amount of colonial penetration, 70% to be precise. Now, Qatar is not controlled by us. It's not even a protectorate. It's merely an influenced territory. All of these territories are merely influenced. We have permanent structures, trade posts, and these trade posts allow us to get a trickle of gems. Our capitalists are able to trade with the locals, and this provides us with a constant source of gems in our economy, and also develops our colonial penetration in the region. Our colonial penetration gradually grows on the basis of, first of all, the merchants that we sent there, then the trade posts, and also the missions. Our missions, religious kind of missions, can increase colonial penetration. And this will happen gradually over time and will allow us to convert these into protectorates and then colonies. Now, the real early hurdle is getting from merely an influenced territory to a protectorate. And if there is a competing power, like Britain, that has sufficient colonial penetration, once we try and turn one of these territories into a protectorate, they can place a stake. And a stake is basically where they are contesting. This is a stake. To have a stake, you only need 15 to 100% colonial penetration. So typically, you would lay a stake if you are the second colonial power there. You are a power that also has an interest in the region. Britain already has enough to actually lay a stake. It has 70% colonial penetration. These merchants are going to be here for a further 12 turns. So they could theoretically do this. The problem is once Britain gets a toehold in the Arabian Peninsula, where are they going to stop? It's really tricky, this. We don't want to sort of alienate Britain. We certainly don't want Britain to be a foe or really a competing colonial power, but it really is a plank of Ottoman foreign policy that we want to sort of minimize the number of big powers with whom we share a border with. We already share a large border with Russia. We've been to war with Russia twice already this century. It's a foe, and we'll be likely fighting another 2 or 3 wars with Russia this century in the next 50 years. We have a large border with Austria. Austria is of course a traditional foe of ours, and very soon we're likely to have a border with France as well, and France will likely be an opponent at some point. We want to minimize the number of borders we have with great powers, and even though Britain can project its strength pretty much anywhere with its large navy, it would not be optimal for us to have Britain having a large toehold in the Arabian Peninsula. So we're hoping that Britain doesn't lay its stake. In any case, we've moved to convert this territory into a protectorate. We already have sufficient colonial penetration here to do it. We don't in these 2 regions just yet. So my thinking is the money that we would have spent converting Libya, we have spent here instead. And the idea is to try and force it through as quick as possible. Now, if Britain lays a stake, this can lead to a diplomatic crisis, which could lead to war. We would obviously would seek to avoid that, and we could do that. But nevertheless, it could also hurt our relations with Britain, and we don't really want that. I mean, really, particularly during this early period, in the first sort of decades of the game, we'd want to cultivate quite close relations with the British, and ideally to even have an alliance with them if we could. So this is concerning. And this is a region that Britain does have an interest in, the Arabian Peninsula, particularly the kind of exterior parts, the southern parts, these kind of outer fringes of the Arabian Peninsula. Britain does have an interest. They have an interest in Aden, and they have an interest in Qatar, Dubai, and Bahrain, and the Trucial states. I don't know how that's pronounced, but yeah, so a concerning development, and I felt that we needed to act quickly before Britain developed its colonial penetration. Now, its merchants, its merchants will provide them with a constant. It cost them 40 capital to manufacture goods, and it would generate 5 capital, and it would generate a return on its investment. They can't turn these merchants into any kind of permanent structure. We already have a trade post there. We already have a kind of a monopoly, really, on trade with the locals. Once this becomes a protectorate, if it becomes a protectorate in 5 terms, so 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 weeks from now, this region will then gradually convert to our military control. Once it becomes a protectorate, the local tribes, the local chiefs, sort of recognise our kind of dominance in the region. It's a qualitative change. And once it becomes a protectorate, it's a halfway house to becoming a colony. It's very hard for powers to stop you converting a territory from a protectorate into a colony. The only way that they can do it is by trying to atrophy your colonial penetration in exactly the way that Italy really is the main kind of culprit. Italy is doing in Libya. They're trying to stop us kind of consolidating this region. They're trying to keep it in a halfway house status that makes this region more volatile, a little bit more difficult to govern, and so on and so forth. Once you turn a territory into a full colony, you do get a significant bonus in terms of the goods that you sell there, in terms of some of the revenue. You quickly accumulate all of the revenue, the sort of stockpile of commodities, and so on and so forth. It becomes like kind of an integral territory, but once a territory is a protectorate, and you try and transfer it, once you have sufficient colonial penetration to make it a colony, no one can stake a claim. It doesn't matter how much colonial penetration they have. They cannot stop you converting a region from a protectorate to a colony. But this early step to halfway house is important. And my thinking is we need to keep a really careful eye on the British here. They're not doing anything here, but certainly Qatar, they're trying to get a bit of a toehold. So we want to kind of nip that in the bud, and we really hope that in the next 10 weeks Britain doesn't try and develop this into a stake. We'll see. We'll have to follow that really, really closely. And over the coming months also we're going to keep a close eye on our military operations and our supply and logistics issues in Aden. Beyond that, it started to dawn on me also that I need to make some important economic decisions to sort of supplement our growth, or to facilitate further growth. And I think one of those decisions is, quite quickly, I need to look at expanding our merchant fleet. Now, merchant fleets are built using private capital, not state revenue. They're not the same as military fleets. They do draw on certain kinds of things like manpower and this sort of thing, and also manufactured goods. They don't require huge amounts of manufactured goods to build, but I think in order to really kind of aid the growth of our economy, particularly with regard to acquiring manufactured goods, this is becoming a real bottleneck now for us. We want to try and get access. At the moment, the only merchant fleets that we have are in the Mediterranean and the Black Sea, as one might imagine. What we really want to have access to is the Western Maritime Trade Box, which is really important for us, but also the North Sea, Northern Europe, and I think the east coast of the United States. So I think in the next year, before we develop our RGOs or our factories much more, I think the plan is to now plough private capital into expanding our merchant fleet, which in turn will allow us to acquire the materials that we need and get access to the markets that are required for us to begin to accelerate the growth of our economy. Because there's no point developing resources for export and this kind of thing and spending long periods of time accumulating manufactured goods, when actually if we have access, better access to the world market, this would open up our opportunities much more. The economy is in pretty good shape, but I'm starting to see exports dwindle a little bit. Actually, this wasn't a particularly bad fortnight with regard to exports. We're struggling, as I say, to get hold of manufactured goods. One thing I have done with manufactured goods is just to tighten up the amount of manufactured goods that we're actually selling on the domestic market. So we've got that down to about 25%. Going to keep a careful eye on manufactured goods, because we want to try and stockpile manufactured goods. Once we have a couple of manufactured goods factories and we have railroads, we can very quickly open that up and make manufactured goods much more available for kind of like for sort of domestic consumption. But for the time being, domestic consumption is principally going to be focused around providing a broad range of agricultural sort of goods and tobacco and this sort of thing. And I think probably also textiles. We've got textiles opened up to 80%, and textile production, of course, once this factory is complete, will increase. The real kind of technology that we're looking for now are railroads. I think we're going to be at the point fairly soon. Now, it won't be a technology that will gradually develop, because it's a theoretical technology that exists already all over Europe. So I think we're a hair's breadth away from having this theoretical. It's something that will suddenly appear at 100%. It's not something that's going to gradually develop. It's something that will sort of arrive at the Ottoman Empire. But if we're at the point where we're building, agricultural enterprises on a capitalist basis, and we're rooting into the economy the kind of principle of capitalist growth, and we're building our first capitalist factory in Constantinople, I think we're not far off from rationally linking that up to railroads. Railroads, in the last analysis, exist everywhere in Eastern, Central Europe, even in the backward Russian Empire. And the Russian Empire, bear in mind, its technology is kind of the same as ours insofar as it is considered a backward power. At this time, Russia is a backward power, and it has access to railroads. Christ, railroads are even being built in places like Lima, I think. I'm sure I saw a notification saying, in fact, Lima is now, Valparaiso is there. Railroads are even being built in Latin America. Here we go, So there's railroads being built in Peru, for Christ's sake. So I think it's there's nothing we can really do to control this spread, but I think it's something that's going to happen in the next year or two. And as soon as that happens, I would like for us to be in a position to have the necessary manufactured goods, steel and coal in place to immediately be in a construction of a railroad in Constantinople, just a city-based railroad that links the city to the agricultural enterprises. This will dramatically increase production. It'll slightly more than double production of all manufactured goods, and we have a manufactured goods shop running at 56%. So yeah, it will double manufactured goods production in Constantinople. It will double tobacco production, fish and cereal farms. So this will be really important, and ultimately we would link the railroad in Constantinople to Adrianople and the Argios outside Adrianople. So the hope is, fingers and toes crossed, that we'll have the development of railroads very, very soon. And in the meantime, we're going to focus on dealing with the supply and logistics problem in Aden. We're going to keep a careful eye on Qatar, and we still might, by the end of this year, have sufficient state revenue to sort of press for colonial status again. We need to keep an eye on these. One term for anthropological expedition and colonial merchants. So I want to keep an eye on, once these kind of cards, so to speak, are played, how much this serves to atrophy our colonial penetration. In Tripoli, it sits at 73%. So we want to keep a careful eye on that. If that atrophies significantly, that might bring us under the threshold, and we want to make sure that we've got ample colonial penetration, so that if there is any atrophying during the period that we're making the transition in Libya, it doesn't actually kind of arrest the process. That's all for now, and the next video will be 1st of January 1852. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.